Mr. Tang, since you are based in Brazil, how would you respond and react to the statement just made by President Rousseff, suspended for 180 days?
Well, as you know, Brazil right now is a very, very divided country. An overwhelming majority of the lower house and the Senate voted to start impeachment proceedings against President Dilma. And as such, she must be retired for 180 days, stand aside for 180 days. And so there is a tremendous debate, of course, where the people who insist on her impeachment said it's not only because of the deficit spending and the fiscal deficit, but it's also because it's causing a tremendous economic hardship on the Brazilian people.
All right.
And as you know, Brazilian recession is huge.
Right. But Mr. Farnsworth, should a president be impeached on the grounds of poor economic policy?
Well, this is clearly a constitutional process in Brazil, and it appears as if both the House and the Senate are pursuing it appropriately. The question is, has she done anything illegal? Has she committed any crimes? It's one thing to be a bad manager of an economy. It's one thing to be a bad politician. It's another to have done things that are illegal or against the law. And I think that's what the Senate has 180 days now to try to decide. I think it's probably pretty clear, however, that they will decide against her, because in order for a conviction, you need 2/3 of the senators to vote in favor of a conviction, in other words, 54 votes. Well, yesterday, or earlier this morning, I should say, they had 55 votes. So if all of those senators continue to vote in the same way, then she will presumably be convicted, and then Vice President Temer, who becomes president today, will finish out the rest of her mandate.
But what would this mean? Is this going to be, as she described, as a coup? If she steps aside and the vice president steps into the office, will there be strong political oppositions from both sides holding different ideas in the country? What would that mean for Brazil politically, given the fact that it is already quite a chaotic situation? Mr. Tang.
Well, you know, the political instability, of course, has a great impact on the economic stability of the country. However, the new ministers announced by future President Temer are very proven. He's made some wise choices in selecting very capable people. Just to name a few, Enrique Meirelles, former president of the Bank of Boston in Boston. Former president of the Central Bank of Brazil under Lula. He's really not a, isn't for one party against another. He's just a very capable executive. José Serra, who was the one who launched the generics medicine in Brazil when he was the Minister of Health, and studied at Cornell University.
But what are you suggesting here, sir?
All people who have. I'm suggesting that President Temer is trying to recover the confidence of the Brazilian people and trying to lift the Brazilian economy from the, recession, hopeless recession that it has been facing. He's trying to give new hope.
So from your perspective, is this a coup, or as she described, of course she's using quite some political extreme words, but is this a coup to you or not?
Well, I mean, to her it is, and to the Workers' Party it is, to the Supreme Court of Brazil, and to the majority of Congress and Senate, it's not.
All right, Mr.
So,
Farnsworth.
I mean, I don't...
Yeah, let me go to another guest. Mr. Farnsworth, what do you make of her description? Of course, she, from her own perspective, have a way of looking at it. But having said that, though, what does that mean for Brazil politically speaking? 24 years ago, there was a similar impeachment, but she didn't commit the crimes, at least not about corruption she has been, in a way, being described as guilty about. And in fact, many of those who try to impeach her are as guilty, if not more, about the corruption as her.
Well, I think anytime you call something in Latin America a coup, you really amplify and polarize the situation. I think there's no doubt about it, and it's not just in the context of Latin America, but also in the context of Brazil. Remember, Brazil faced a military dictatorship for many years before democracy was restored, even before the impeachment that you're referring to of former President Collor. So this is like adding fuel to the fire. It's a signal to her supporters in the Workers' Party and others who might be supporting her that indeed she's going to fight these charges and fight them aggressively, that she's not just going to go away and say, okay, well, they made their vote and I'm going to retire. So I think to the extent she continues to make this an issue, call it a coup, and try to continue pursuing that line of argument, that will continue to polarize the country and frankly make the restoration of economic confidence that your other guest was referring to that much more difficult, because it's going to require political consensus to push through the economic reforms that are plainly required to get Brazil out of the very deep recession it's been in now for the last 2 years.
All right. Just to recap for our audience who are watching our program right now, just now during the process of program, we have been receiving signals in which the president of Brazil, who has been impeached, or at least in the process of being impeached, President Rousseff was talking about herself as being not guilty, and the overall impeachment trial and the process of impeaching her is what she described as a coup, and she said it is unjust. Of course, those are her words, but now let me come back to you, Mr. Yang, here in Beijing. Who are dividing the country? Of course, at this critical moment, people want to throw those words to those that are their political opposition. But who are dividing the country? Is the president dividing the country? Or are those who try to impeach her dividing the country? Of course, they all say it's the other side. But then when a country is divided in terms of their ideas as to whether president should go or remain, will that country be a stable one? What is the next one who is likely to be in the office, at least for now, can do?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question to answer. But from my view, I think it cannot due to the President Dilma Rousseff herself and also the operation. I think the difficult time or the bad economic performance and the political struggle and also the social unrest, all the factors have been combined together to make the very difficult time for Brazil. I think it's not the wrongdoing of the Dilma Rousseff herself. If the next one, maybe the Temer, come into power as the acting president of Brazil, I think it's also difficult for him. Maybe the next president is not him, maybe the next one. But I think no matter who is the next president of Brazil, it's difficult for them, because the root cause of Brazil is not the political struggle. It's because of the how to foster the construction reform in the country.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Therefore, let me go to you, Mr. Farnsworth. Some have been arguing for her leave the current position. One, of course, there's a legal impeachment process going on. She has to, go with that. But at the same time, others say, well, please go, because if you don't go, the country will be divided. But if she does leave, the country will remain divided. That is the question. So, Mr. Farnsworth, what do you say can be the choices? President Rousseff, she is still the president because she's not being impeached legally. She's only in the process being suspended. So what can she do?
Well, I think that's exactly right. I mean, there is a question here about when will this situation be surpassed? And I think that the real answer is that many Brazilians are already looking ahead to the next presidential elections in 2018, no matter if President Rousseff is permanently removed from the presidency or not. The irony here, and I think you're alluding to it, is very interesting. The irony here is she was reelected as president only a year and a half ago at the end of 2014, and she was inaugurated for her second term in early 2015. So they just went through an election. She was just reelected, and now her popularity is down at around 10%, if you can believe the polls in Brazil. And so she has clearly lost public support. You know, I don't know that that people are going to want her necessarily to come back into the office, into her office. I think that, truthfully speaking, they're more concerned about their daily lives. I mean, the difficulty of getting to work in terms of public transportation, the cost of living that's going up and the standard of living that's going down, some of the unemployment that's increasing, some of the inflation that is now beginning to be an issue.
It is very clear, Mr. Farnsworth, all the symptoms you have just described to all of us and also to the Brazilian citizens. But the question is, Mr. Tang, before we go, very briefly from you, even for the next leader, whoever it is, things are not likely to change in half a year or in 1 year or two. So can Brazil continue to impeach whoever is in the office? And what is going to be the alternative policies?
Well, like I said, President Dilma is putting out some clever policies, has made some wise choices for ministers. And I believe that according to the stock market and also the exchange rate, the people have new hope. Now, according to the latest poll, however, you know, former President Lula has the largest intention of vote and also the largest rejection factor. And the second will come Marina for the 2018 elections. And third and last is the candidate of the opposition, Aécio Neves. So it's very early to say what will happen. It will depend on how well Temer is able to govern Brazil. And he has overwhelming support both in the lower house and in the Senate.
All right.
You know, all the people, the overwhelming people who voted to oust President Dilma and have him replace her will probably support his policies.